Good morning, President Coley. Thank you for joining us in these conversations.
Good morning. I'm blessed to be here.
I want to acknowledge and applaud your commitment to the listening tours as a way of coming to know our community before leaping out in front of the parade. And I don't want to take up questions that might presume conclusions about things that you're still scoping out. But there are some large philosophical points that you might feel comfortable to chat about, and I'll put these questions in the framework of large public institutions in general. So, clearly, technological changes in the world have changed the way we live and learn. I have a hard time getting my head around the fact that it was only in 2007, not quite 8 years ago, that the first iPhone was released. The universal desire to be loved is now expressed in the ubiquitous desire to be liked on Facebook. The opportunity of huge advances in connectivity present challenges in terms of our perennial balancing act between providing access and maintaining quality. What thoughts do you have about how the large public university navigates these uncharted waters?
I think you've touched on a critical question for all of higher education, and especially public higher education. The Chronicle of Higher Education, about maybe 5 years ago, released a report called 2020, and it identified those critical issues that are facing public higher education and the questions that we have to ask ourselves. And those include, who are our students? What do we want them to know and learn? And what are the various methods and approaches that we can use for attaining that learning? And what I came away with is clearly technology has the ability to play an important role in the life of higher education. But I think we have to define that. And I look at defining that relative to it being seen as complementary to what we do. Technology, a recent study showed that out of school, now this is not within the 8 hours that students are in school, but out of school, students spend an average of 8 hours a day using some form of technology. So they're going to come here expecting and feeling very comfortable with technology. And so I think the opportunity is, how do we define that? And what are the ways in which we can build our capacity to use it in complementary ways for instruction? I think clearly technology has a significant role to play in our administrative operations and in the way that we process and generally serve students outside of the classroom. I've seen some extraordinary demonstrations of integrating technology into the classroom setting. And so I think it's a conversation that's going to be very much at the center of our thinking. But I start with, yes, technology is here with us, but how do we shape that in a way that still holds on to our philosophy of learn by doing, of being concerned with access? Because the other thing that is very clear is something called the digital divide. Not all students have access to technology. And I'm a believer that a touch screen will never substitute for the personal engagement and the touches that we provide students.
Oh, I love that last line, because I think one of the things that people forget about education is that it's not the imparting of knowledge so much as it is a socialization process. And you can't do that entirely with a screen in between.
Right.
A different topic, any tenure-track faculty member, if you ask them about their assigned and related duties, they're going to give you a long list of the things that they do outside of classroom, advising students and participating in meetings and writing reports and supporting extracurricular events and student participation in research, and, oh yeah, of course, their own research, trying to to work with the teacher-scholar model. The most distressing fact about the current state of public higher education for many faculty members is the regrettable decline in the proportion of tenure-track faculty members, the folks who can actually do all of that outside of the classroom work. The governor of Wisconsin is not the first one to make the silly mistake of assuming that classroom hours are the total of our work. And I know you don't suffer that misconception, but what do we do about, I know also that you're genuinely committed to increasing, as the system is, tenure-track faculty, but how do we do that? What are the trade-offs involved, and how does it look?
Well, as you probably know, I do believe that we need to take a serious look at the composition of our faculty ranks, and we've not gotten into the situation in 1 year's time, so we will not get out of it in 1 year's time. But I think we have to have a thoughtful analysis of where is the greatest demand, where are those pressure points, and then the broader picture of what's our vision for the academic mission. What does that look like? And where are there gaps in achieving that academic mission? And so, as I've mentioned in other conversations and presentations, in the fall we will begin a university-wide discussion around those broad topics. I have mentioned in my January 6th speech that we would undertake a 5-year hiring plan, and that hiring plan has to be informed by, again, our mission and vision. I don't think it's sufficient for us to say we lost this and therefore we need to replace. I think it has to be informed by, these are our goals, these are the gaps in the expertise and knowledge base that would prevent us from achieving those goals, and we need to hire in those areas. These are the programs with huge demands, but we just don't have sufficient faculty. The fact that so many of our programs have become impacted, I understand why, but it concerns me. And I think that we want to look at all of that as part of going forward and defining the quality and the excellence of our academic offerings.
That's a great lead into another question that I have. I personally have become convinced that the strident call for accountability from public institutions is often tied to a political agenda that's hostile to the institutions themselves. Still, it's hard to argue with genuine assessment and the reflective examination of what works and what does need different treatment, if that's surely a part of the kind of strategic planning that you're talking about. In the most general terms, what thoughts do you have about the most useful and the most effective and the most creative ways to identify our successes and the reasons for them, and spotlighting our need to find a new path challenges?
I really appreciate the premise of that question, because I do think it's legitimate for us to be asked, how do you know you're successful? I think that's we're a public higher education institution. At the same time, I then look at that as it's our opportunity to define our success. I'm the type of person where I recognize that there are constraints external to us, but I really believe in us coming together to help shape our destiny. I think that this is an important element, because if we oftentimes don't understand the role that it can play, then it gets defined for us. It gets very prescriptive, and I'm concerned because I'm hearing a lot of talk at the federal level, at the state level, of becoming even more prescriptive. So what I see is it's a question that promotes communal dialogue, departments coming together, and I don't think it can be done successfully on an individualistic basis. I think it prompts dialogue among colleagues within a department and a program to say, all right, what are we trying to achieve with our major? Where will this learning, this experience, this activity take place? And how can we identify ways in which to have the confidence that the students are achieving the goals that we've set? You know, oftentimes we come into academia in very isolated, individualistic mindset. I think, in fact, doctoral education needs to begin to see the role that it can play in preparing faculty to move into these kinds of settings. But we come with a very individualistic approach oftentimes, and assessment in my mind is not individualistic. It is really about the community of scholars coming together to say, how do we answer these questions? Where in the curriculum? And then getting that feedback after we've explored this and being able to say, well, you know, we have unintended outcomes. So what do we do about that? How do we think about that in some other ways? And recognize that many times these are proxy measures. So that I think we need to not see it as we're evaluating your individual teaching, but rather as students engage with us as a collective, what is it that we can look back on and say, yeah, we did very well in these areas. These are the areas we need to improve. I have a philosophy of continuous improvement. I see myself constantly as a work in progress. And it doesn't diminish the things that I've achieved at this point, but I also see that there is room to improve. And so I approach leadership from that standpoint. I applaud the successes. This is an exceptional campus. It's exceptional people, exceptional programs, exceptional students and staff. And so we need to be proud of articulating these successes in various means, and assessment is just one of them.
I'm really glad that you're thinking proactively about trying to get ahead of the curve, and I'm a political scientist, I'll admit that often legislation written by legislators pretty distant from the academic community is blunt and heavy-handed and sometimes pretty misguided. So what do we do about making sure that this message is getting to Sacramento and to the folks in Washington, D.C.?
Well, see, I first start with what is it that what questions are they trying to answer? Because oftentimes it's the gap between what they want to know and our ability to articulate it in the context, in the unique way, in the context of the way we operate. And so for me, that's why a lot of my work will be certainly meeting with people externally and talking about what we do, talking about how do we, I know that we're discussing our university learning outcomes. See, for me, the university's learning outcomes really says that regardless of major, this is what we want students to experience at our campus. So that no one program, college, department owns the university learning outcomes. It is a looking at 40,000 feet and saying, as students go across that stage, we want to make sure that in addition to the disciplinary knowledge, that they have these values or these skills or this knowledge base. That's what gets articulated. That's what gets translated. I used to share the learning outcomes with various groups, whether it be parents, whether it be legislators, because I wanted them to know, if your students come here or you're representing this district, this is what our aims are for our students. It was quite important to the parents when they saw, again, it's not just the disciplinary, but when they saw that we wanted students to have critical reasoning and analytical skills, when they saw that we wanted students to be able to work in teams and across diverse. So it wasn't, again, major based, but we all contribute and reinforce those outcomes.
One of the things about Cal Poly Pomona is that we are seen as distinct.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're never CSU Pomona,
Right.
we're Cal Poly Pomona,
Right.
and that makes us different. But sometimes people mistake that difference to be simply a matter of our professional programs, the engineering program and the hospitality management program. So what you're talking about is really the way in which we're addressing the whole student.
Exactly.
That's
right. Exactly. And I think that that's when I talk about our strategic direction setting. See, coming in new, I want to hear, what do we mean by learn by doing? What do we mean by teacher, scholar? What makes us distinctive? Because a lot of times when you just have been a part of something, you take it for granted. But I want you to see me as knocking on the door and wanting to listen to those conversations about what this really means and crystallize it. Because so far as I've engaged in the listening tours, there's a common theme. And one of the themes is that we have not made clear our, and I'm looking for another word, brand, but it's more making clear of our distinctiveness. We just enjoy it, but when you're thinking about donors and funders and parents and prospective students and legislators, I want it crystal clear. This is who we are. This is what we are about. And you can see it whether it's in our facilities, whether it's in our student affairs programs, or whether it's in the academic programs, or wherever people work. There is a recognition of how we all contribute to that distinctiveness. And so that's what makes this so invigorating and so exciting. I can't imagine any other place I'd rather be than to be here, because it is a campus that has goodwill, deeply cares about students, values excellence, and it's healthy. There's a spirit about this campus that's very appealing.
I hope you do find a better word, because I hate the language of branding.
Yes,
university.
well, help me out. What might...
It seems to demean what we do. It
Exactly.
makes it entirely too commercial.
Exactly.
We'll work on that.
Yeah, distinctiveness, or yeah. So I'm going to ask, maybe the Senate can take that up.
We'll work on that.
Okay.
It's a challenge, though, because I think the language that we use really does have an impact on the way people perceive us.
Right.
We don't have very much time. Tell me, what's the most pleasant surprise that you've gotten since arriving? Not just the things that we do well, but something that really caught you and said, whoa.
I think it's the genuine care and concern expressed for this campus by the alumni. Because, I engage with the people here day to day, but I've had an opportunity to engage with more and more alums and people. I was at an event the other week, Bright Prospects, and 4 students came up to me and said, "We're Cal Poly Pomona alums." And of course they want to take a selfie. And I was in Pasadena, I was in New York, where we met with some of the alums. It is extremely noticeable that people want to first let you know they're an alum, but also how genuine they feel that this campus made a difference in their lives.
It's a great base from which to work.
It is. It really is. Yeah.
Well, thanks very much for having this conversation.
Well,
I'm really
you.
looking forward to the next part of this journey.
I am too. I am too. We'll take that together.